So with diet, there are a lot of differences in opinion right now with what the best diet is, and this can be confusing. But in Chinese medicine, it's been written about simply and clearly for centuries, and it's not a passing fad. So it's very common sense guidelines to healthy, balanced eating. What I love about it is that it's not difficult. It's not very strict about avoiding specific foods. So it's quite easy to implement and to maintain as well. And it really just focuses on having easy to digest foods. And in Chinese medicine, digestion is warm transformation, meaning that it requires warm energy. In Chinese medicine, the stomach is referred to as the cooking pot. So it takes the food and liquids and mushes it up into a 100-degree soup. And in order to digest our foods, there has to be enough heat and fire under this cooking pot. After the foods are broken down in the stomach, it's the spleen system's job to transform these nutrients in order to produce qi and blood. So the more qi and blood we have, the stronger our immune system is going to be. I always advise my patients to have more warm cooked foods instead of cold raw foods. And a general rule of thumb is to look at your diet and have about 80% of your diet as cooked foods versus just 20% of your diet raw cold foods. Chinese medicine, it really, it does have a different opinion. But there are ways around this. You can still have your salads, you can have your smoothies, which I'll be getting into, I think, in the next slide. There are ways to balance that cold energy. So some examples of the cold and raw foods that we're talking about, again, are smoothies, frozen fruits in your smoothies, salads. It goes without saying ice cream, popsicles, even sushi, iced beverages. If you talk to any Chinese medicine doctor, they're very much against putting ice in your drinks. Yogurt for breakfast, that is actually a big no-no because we always recommend a warm breakfast. So having yogurt for breakfast is so typical, but not advised. And having fruit straight from the fridge, I always tell people to try to have your fruit out on your kitchen counter for at least a few hours before you consume your fruit. So again, there are ways to balance the cold foods with warmth. So for example, if you have a salad, you can follow your salad with a warm cup of tea, or you can add cooked foods to your salads, like a piece of chicken breast or salmon or a boiled egg. And for your smoothies in the mornings, maybe leave your frozen berries. And proper hydration is also very important to your digestion and your immunity. So always drinking warm or hot water, again, instead of cold water. And you want to sort of sip on hot water throughout the entire day. So have a thermos with you. Not only is it water that you want to drink more, but you want to also have foods that have more water content. So things like soups and stews. Congee is great, which is a sort of soupy rice, very often used in Asia. Bone broth is one of my favorites, very, very nutritious. Porridge, steamed rice, steamed grains, steamed veggies, cooked fruits. I also recommend to not use too many spices in foods because spices can deplete the fluids and possibly dehydrate you. And another thing that we talk about very often in Chinese medicine are these damp, sticky foods. And basically these damp, sticky foods are difficult to digest, and they also will congest the lungs. So we don't want to do that because the lungs, again, going back to the Wei Qi, the lungs distribute and control the circulation of Wei Qi. So some examples of damp, sticky foods would be dairy products, especially cheese, because cheese is quite condensed. Any refined sugars like cakes, pies, pastries. Gluten is very sticky. Alcohol, especially beer, is very damp. Pizza, of course, burgers, French fries, anything that's deep fried. Bananas are actually quite damp, and I'll talk to people that, they'll have 1 or 2 bananas every single day, and that's just too much. So again, it's about moderation. You can have your bananas, but maybe have 2 or 3 bananas a week instead. Processed foods, margarine, trans fats, rancid oils, those are all damp, sticky foods. And if you look at your tongue after having some damp, sticky foods, you may notice that your tongue coating can get quite thick. And it could be either like a white coating or yellow. And then you can also maybe notice some mucus lines on your tongue. And that will tell you that your digestion has been affected by these damp, sticky foods. Also, I should say that you shouldn't ever feel overly full after a meal. So let's say in the mornings, if you feel bloated or overly full from the previous night's dinner, you probably ate the wrong food and possibly you ate something that was damp or sticky. So Chinese medicine doesn't only talk about what to eat, but also how to eat. So you want to eat at regular times every day. You don't want to skip meals, but you want to also give your digestion a little break between meals. I don't often recommend intermittent fasting, especially at this time, dealing with the pandemic. It's not the best time to start experimenting with intermittent fasting. You don't want to overeat. You also don't want to undereat. Try not to eat late at night because our digestion is not working well in the evenings. You want to stop eating about 8 o'clock at night and avoid drinking cold beverages with your meals. Also, this is an interesting one. You don't want to have a lot of mental or emotional stress or stimulation while you're eating. So for example, you don't want to have those difficult, stressful conversations during a meal. You don't want to watch the news or even reading a book or studying while eating because that can interfere with our digestion. And we also don't want to eat on the go. You instead sitting, enjoying your food and chewing your food thoroughly is very helpful to a proper digestion. And going back to why digestion is important, because a healthy digestion is actually very key to a healthy immune system. And eating according to the seasons is something that maybe people have heard about when it comes to Chinese medicine. And the philosophy is that our bodies are in tune with nature. So for example, in spring, it's a time of renewal and movement after being a little bit more sedentary in the winter. So it's a time when you can incorporate fresh greens, green onions, cilantro, parsley, and other veggies and fruits while still eating the majority of your food cooked or at least lightly cooked. And then in summertime, it's a time that you can take advantage of a little bit more of those fresh fruits and veggies and having them raw because your body is better equipped in the summer to digest these cold foods. And some examples would be fresh greens, watermelon. But I should say that if you do suffer from a lot of bloating or loose bowel movements, you still want to stick to a mainly cooked diet, even in the summer. And then in autumn, we're starting to transition to cooler weather and shorter days. So you can start to have more soups and stews and roasted root veggies like carrots or sweet potatoes or squash. And you want to also drink more tea with ginger because ginger is quite warming. And then lastly, in winter, it's a time of restoration and reflection. And we can cook our food slower in order to add more heat. We can add more warming spices like cinnamon or dried ginger or cloves or cumin. And winter is especially a time that I would say to avoid those frozen and cold raw foods.